Hi everyone. So this is part two of the memory chapter, and this will be on your quiz. And so recognize that when we forget things, it's actually a good thing sometimes. It keeps our mind, free and uncluttered. It helps us focus on what's important, and makes our brains more efficient. So forgetting is actually really important. Your book talks about Solomon Sherobesky, and he struggled with the idea that if we're abstractly thinking, that leads to memory overload. Jill Price is pointed out in the book as having a highly superior memory, but that it actually disrupted her daily life. These people have a problem forgetting things, and this leads to challenges because our brains actually get full. So we remember things that are important very easily, but other details, even as it relates to those important things, are often forgotten. So memory, when we have a bad memory, it could be a failure in encoding information, in storing information, or in retrieving information. Any one of the three will cause a memory problem. And recognize that our minds actually filter and lose a lot of the information during processing in the brain. And some extreme cases of memory loss, we have in your book, they talk about Henry Molaison, who got anterograde amnesia and was unable to form new memories. Jimmy had retrograde amnesia and was stuck in the past, but he could still learn new skills unconsciously. So there may be two distinct memory systems. So let's have a closer look at that.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's video on amnesia and its types. Before proceeding any further, a quick note. We have a series of videos on the topic of memory in our channel. If you wish, you can watch these videos as it can be helpful in understanding some of the concepts from today's video. You can find the link of all of the videos in the memory playlist in the description box below. With that said, let's begin today's video. Amnesia is a memory impairment that deteriorates either totally or partially the retrieval of memory stored in the long-term memory stores. It is the loss of long-term memory caused due to physical damage or trauma to the brain or due to some form of neurological disease or psychological trauma. Now there are about 14 different types of amnesia as displayed here. However, in today's video, we will focus on two popular and key types of amnesia, namely anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia impairs the ability to create new memories. In this form of amnesia, one does not impair long-term memories per se that were stored from before the event that caused the anterograde amnesia. However, they do lose the ability to create new memories after the event that caused the anterograde amnesia. Now, there are various symptoms that mark the advent of anterograde amnesia. Firstly, the inability to form new memories impairs the ability to learn new things. In some cases, the inability to form new memories can give rise to the formation of false memories, which are misinterpreted with the real memories, leading to a situation called confabulation. Additionally, this inability to form new memories can impact one's motor abilities as well, as one might face the issues of uncoordinated movements. Finally, all types of short and long-lived memories can get affected in this type of amnesia. Now, various factors can cause anterograde amnesia. Some of the common factors include suffering from Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome or Korsakoff's amnesic syndrome, which is a memory disorder in itself that results from the deficiency of vitamin B1, that is thiamine deficiency, and is associated with long-term alcohol consumption or alcoholism. Korsakoff syndrome usually damages the nerve cells and supporting cells in the brain and spinal cord, as well as the parts of the brain involved with memory. Furthermore, severe malnutrition resulting in a lack of proper nutritional levels in the body can cause the development of this type of amnesia. Memory loss in patients with brain stroke can also be associated with disorientation due to anterograde amnesia, stemming from the inability to acquire or accumulate new memories after the episode of a stroke. Furthermore, external head trauma to the head, which can cause concussion, can often result in anterograde amnesia. Among some of the other causes include severe brain injuries affecting the hippocampus and its nearby areas. For instance, infections such as encephalitis, which is a type of brain inflammation, is even closely related to anterograde amnesia. Additionally, a reduced flow of oxygen in the blood that causes the state of anoxia can also cause anterograde amnesia. Retrograde amnesia is a form of memory loss that involves an inability to access memories formed before the onset of amnesia. Retrograde amnesia is sometimes temporary, but can also be permanent or progressive. The severity and the duration of this type of amnesia depends on what is causing it. The symptoms of retrograde amnesia can vary depending on the nature and the severity of the injury. Some common signs that a person may experience include not being able to remember personal events, names, faces, places, dates, and other facts that were learned before the onset of this form of amnesia. Additionally, one may forget facts and information pertaining to general knowledge that they had learned before the onset of this amnesia as well. One may also have difficulties in retaining the skills and abilities that were learned before the onset of retrograde amnesia. And finally, not being able to recall older long-term memories such as events that occurred during one's childhood is a common symptom or sign observed in this form of amnesia. Now, some people only lose their memories of events that happened before they began to experience retrograde amnesia, which means that they can still form new memories. But in other cases, we observe that people will have both retrograde and anterograde amnesia, which means that they will have the inability to also create new memories. Similar to the anterograde amnesia, retrograde amnesia can also be caused due to Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome and encephalitis. In addition to these factors, retrograde amnesia can be caused due to suffering cardiac arrests, as a heart attack or cardiac arrest can lead to a temporary lack of oxygen in the brain, which may lead to retrograde amnesia and other cognitive problems as well as global brain damage. Furthermore, neurological diseases or progressive conditions such as Alzheimer's, Huntington's, and multiple sclerosis may lead to symptoms of retrograde amnesia as well. Furthermore, electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, which is a treatment for depression and other psychiatric conditions that involves inducing a seizure with brief electrical current, can cause retrograde amnesia-like memory loss. Now, the memory loss caused due to ECT may improve with time, but some people experience persistent memory gaps. Furthermore, seizures due to epilepsy or other causes can also damage areas of the brain associated with memory. Finally, traumatic brain injury, or TBI, can damage the brain due to stroke or other forms of injury that can cause memory loss similar to the retrograde amnesia. Alright, that is the end of today's video. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Braincyclopedia channel, leave a like, share this video with someone you think will benefit from today's content, comment below and leave your feedback or future video request, and press the bell icon to remain updated about all our new uploads.
So you can see that we have lots of memory quirks, right? We remember things easily but forget things that are not important. Sometimes our memory fails in encoding, as I mentioned before, and we filter a lot of stuff. So we actually covered this slide, and we covered this slide. So when do we forget? So we forget when things are really not noticed. We don't pay attention to them. Our age and attention affect our ability to encode the information. The older we get, the more easily we forget. And famous logos are often not encoded accurately, right? So even though we may be remembering things, we might not be remembering completely accurately. So there's this thing called the forgetting curve, right? Forgetting happens rapidly at first and then it levels off. And the decay of memory is part of our natural process. Ebbinghaus did studies to show that we had long-term retention despite the fact that we might forget initially. So let's look at that a bit closer.
It was midnight when Bernice got off work. She was exhausted after a long and terrible day and just wanted to get home to a hot bath. She was driving down the street, flipping through radio stations, when she pulled up to a stop sign and saw something weird. A shadowy figure ran up to an idling fruit truck, pushed the delivery man down, grabbed a crate of bananas, and ran off around the corner. Bernice was pretty shaken up, but she made sure the driver was okay, and then she called the police, describing the thief as a pale, lanky man wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. She gave the cops her information, and then she went home. A couple of days later, the police asked her to come down to the station to identify a potential thief, a guy who more or less matched her description and was found eating a banana early that morning near the scene of the crime. Although the guy professed innocence, Bernice said it was him, and they locked him up. But at the trial, the defense called a memory expert to the stand, and soon after that, the suspect walked. Today's lesson may not make you an expert worthy of the witness stand, but by the time we're done, you'll understand a lot more about how we retrieve memories we think we've stored, and why the accused banana thief was set free. We're all constantly retrieving memories throughout the day. You're remembering where you parked your car, or if you fed the cat, or called your mom because it's her birthday. You'll remember from last week that while our implicit memories, like how to talk and ride a bike, are dealt with on a mostly automatic and non-conscious level, our explicit memories, the chronicles of our personal experiences and general knowledge, often require conscious, effortful work. Bernice had to notice, encode, store, and later consciously retrieve details about the crime she witnessed. What color was the guy's jacket? What did he look like? What did he steal? And where did he run? It takes a lot of work to retrieve memories from long-term storage, and the truth is, a lot can go wrong along the way. In order to understand all of the many fascinating ways you forget things, we need to talk more about how we remember. Our memories are not like books in the library of your mind. You don't just pluck a neatly packaged memory right off the shelf about where you left your phone or the hair color of a fruit thief. Instead, your memories are more like the spider webs in the dank catacombs of your mind, a series of interconnected associations that link all sorts of diverse things as bits of information get stuck to other bits of information. Like Maybe Bernice remembers that the night of the crime was chilly with a full moon and that Beyonce was on the radio and the fruit truck had plates from California, which is where her grandfather lives. All those bits of information in the web of memory, the weather, the song, the plates, can serve as retrieval cues, kind of like a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to a particular memory. The more retrieval cues you inadvertently or intentionally build along the way, the better you can backtrack and find the memory you're looking for. This way of activating associations non-consciously is called priming, sometimes called memoryless memory. It's how invisible memories that you didn't know you had can awaken old associations. Priming is often how you jog your memory. This kind of recall is sometimes referred to as context-dependent memory. Say you're reading in bed and you want to underline a quote but you don't have a pen. Well, you get up and you go to the other room to find your special light-up Hello Kitty pen, but you get distracted and suddenly you find yourself in the kitchen. You're like, why mind? Why am I in the kitchen? What is here? Why am... There was and I don't know, but I'm here now, and... It's only when you retrace your steps and return to bed to the initial context where you read that quote and encoded that first thought of wanting that pen that the memory comes back. And then you're like, oh, I need to go get the pen. If some memories are context-dependent, others are state-dependent, and also mood-congruent. This just means that our states and our emotions can also serve as retrieval cues. If I had a throbbing headache and a super bad day, I'm more likely to start recalling bad memories because I'm priming negative associations. But of course, if I'm relaxed and jolly, I'm prone to remember happy times and prolonging my good mood. Another funny memory retrieval quirk speaks not to our location or emotions, but to the order in which we receive new information. So, say you make a grocery list in the morning, but a few hours later, you're at the store, you realize you left it at home. You'd be more likely to recall the first items on the list, bananas and bread, and the last items, pickles and cheese, than anything in the middle. This is known as the serial position effect. This might be because the early words benefited from what's known as the primacy effect and made it into your long-term memory because they were rehearsed more. Meanwhile, the last words lingered in the working memory through the recency effect. But those poor middle words, they didn't benefit from either effect and therefore escaped your brain, which is why you now have no toilet paper, dog food, toothpaste, or cookies. Who forgets cookies? But even with all these tricks and associations, things still go wrong. Memory can fail or become distorted, and of course we forget things. Forgetfulness can be as minor as those frustrating moments where you're like, it's on the tip of my tongue, it's the guy. The guy's got a hair and a face and like shoulders. Or as major as Clive Waring, whose neurological damage made it impossible for him to recall the past or create new memories. Of course, we all forget things, and typically we do it in one of three different ways. We fail to encode it, we fail to retrieve it, or we experience what psychologists call storage decay. Sometimes forgetting something just means it never really got through your encoding process in the first place. I mean, think of all the stuff that's going on around you at any given moment. We only actually notice a fraction of what we sense, and we can only consciously hold so many bits of information in our minds at any given time, so what we fail to notice, we tend to not encode and thus don't remember. Bernice noticed a dark jacket, Beyonce, and bananas, but she didn't encode much about the driver or the color of the thief's shoes. Then again, even memories that have been encoded are still vulnerable to storage decay or natural forgetting over time. Interestingly, even though we can forget things pretty quickly, the amount of data that we forget can actually level off after a while. This means that Bernice would have forgotten about half of what she first noticed from the crime scene a couple days later, but what she still remembered, she'd likely hang on to, because the rate at which we forget tends to plateau. A lot of times forgetting doesn't mean our memory just faded to black, it means we can't call it up on demand because of retrieval failure. We all know the common tip of the tongue phenomenon where you feel like you know the name of that weird-looking, hard-backed animal that rolls up into a ball. It's kind of cute and weird, and I think they get leprosy or something, but what is it? That's where retrieval cues can come in handy. If I say to you, it starts with the letter A, suddenly, armadillo! Sometimes these retrieval problems stem from interference from other memories getting in the way, essentially cluttering the brain. Sometimes old stuff that you've learned keeps you from recalling new stuff, like if you change one of your passwords but keep recalling an old one every time you want to log in. That's called proactive or forward-acting interference. The flip side of that is retroactive or backward-acting interference, which happens when new learning gets in the way of recalling old information. Like if you start studying Spanish, it may interfere with the French that you've already learned. There's a lot of reconstruction and inferring involved when you try to flesh out a memory, and every time you replay it in your mind or relate it to a friend, it changes. Just a little. So, in a way, we're all sort of perpetually rewriting our pasts. While this is an inevitable part of human nature, it can prove dangerous at times. Misleading information can get incorporated into a memory and twist the truth, and yes, there's an effect for this. It's called the misinformation effect. American psychologist and memory expert Elizabeth Loftus has spent decades showing how eyewitnesses inadvertently tweak and reconstruct their memories after accidents or crimes. In one experiment, two groups watched a film of a car accident. Those asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other estimated much higher speeds than those who were asked about the cars hitting each other. Smash is the leading word that essentially altered the witnesses' memories, so much so that a week later, when both groups were asked if they saw any broken glass, those who heard the word smash were twice as likely to report seeing bits of glass when in fact the original film didn't show any. In Bernice's case, chances are her memory of the robbery would be altered if the prosecution said the thief assaulted rather than pushed the driver. This sort of interfering or misleading information may also manifest itself as source misattribution, like when you forget or misrecall the source of a memory. In the case of Bernice, when she saw the suspect in the courtroom, she thought she recognized him from the night of the crime, when in reality, he just served her coffee earlier that day. But her memory of the event had probably already been tweaked several times before she even made it into the courtroom. Like, she relived the tale multiple times in her own mind in which she told other people about it, and every time she introduced errors, filling in memory gaps with reasonable guesses. Not only that, but we know Bernice was already tired and stressed when she witnessed the event, and we know our emotions can influence whether we remember or whether we forget. Because memory is both a reconstruction and a reproduction of past events, we can't ever really be sure if a memory is real just because it feels real. Elizabeth Loftus knows this. She's frequently called in to testify against the accuracy of eyewitnesses. In fact, of all the U.S. prisoners who have been exonerated based on DNA evidence presented by the Innocence Project, a nonprofit legal group, 75% of them were convicted by mistaken eyewitnesses. That is a lot of innocent people. Bernice meant well, of course. She's an honest lady, but all those factors, the emotion, the retelling, the suggestions of outside sources, combined with the darkness, the quick glimpse, the passing of time, maybe even the Beyonce, ended up leading to a mistake in the thief's identification. Turns out the human memory is actually a very fragile thing. We're all largely the product of the stories that we tell ourselves. If you haven't forgotten already, today you learned about how our memories are stored in webs of association aided by retrieval cues and priming and influenced by context and mood. You also learned how we forget information, how our memories are susceptible to interference and misinformation, and why eyewitnesses are often not as reliable as you might think. Thank you for watching, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. To learn how you can keep these lessons coming while earning awesome perks, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was...
So that's a bit more about the forgetting curve and forgetting. So sometimes when we have a bad memory or we're having problems with our memory, it's not because the memory's gone, it's because we can't get them. And he referred to that in the video, right? So think about that, the tip of the tongue experience when you know that you know what it is you're trying to remember, but you just can't remember it. But if I give you a cue, like give you, the letter that it starts with or something along those lines, you'll be more easily able to remember it. So that means that it's there, you just can't access it. So in this video, he also talked about proactive interference, when old information prevents you from remembering new information, right? So, like he talked about, if you learned French and you're trying to learn Spanish, the fact that you had learned French before might prevent you from learning Spanish as easily. Retroactive interference, on the other hand, is when we have new information that disrupts our old memories. So if we learn just before going to sleep, it's less prone to this idea of retroactive interference. So when we look at the concept of motivated forgetting, and more specifically the cookie jar mystery and memory discrepancies, as in your book, it tells us a lot about memory. And remember, in the very beginning we talked about Freud. I don't know if you remember this from the very first class when we talked about the history. We talked a little bit about this idea that Freud has of repressed memories. So that's something you should definitely know from the book. Now, there's a case study in your book with Flight AT-236 and the mechanics of trauma memory, how that works. And McKinnon it also goes over some information of McKinnon and McKinnon's research in getting away and debunking the repression myth, right? Again, you would want to know that for the book, for the test. There's also some psychological effects from high stress experiences on memory. So how we make mistakes is important. Misinformation can lead to a distortion of our memory, and imagination can create false memories, and we're going to watch something now a little bit more about what is this idea of false memories. We've talked about it already. Let's look a little bit deeper into that.
American psychologists Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer created a study in order to test theories about suggestibility. They showed a video of car crash to multiple students. Now, the students answered multiple questions about what they saw in the video, but Loftus and Palmer's questions were very intentional. They included the following questions and changed out one specific word to see if it altered students' answers. About how fast were the cars going when they into each other? And they used words like smashed, collided, bumped, hit, and contacted. Why? Because two cars contacting each other doesn't sound as dramatic as two cars smashing each other, right? Well, the psychologists thought so too, and the results of the study show that the choice of the verb made a difference in the participants' memory of what they saw. The people who were asked how fast the cars smashed into each other predicted that they were going up to 40.8 miles an hour. When the cars contacted each other, though, participants reported that they were going 31.8 miles per hour. Depending on the speed limit and other factors in a criminal case, 9 miles per hour could potentially make or break a case. Suggestibility can have a powerful impact on a trial like this. So this study has become one of the most significant contributions to something called the misinformation effect. And the misinformation effect, coined by Loftus, is the phenomenon that describes how memories can change and become false due to exposure from misleading questions, information, or new memories. Next, let's get on to something called the Mandela effect. So I'm going to list off some true and false statements, and you try to tell which ones I'm lying in. Hannibal Lecter never said, "Hello, Clarice," in Silence of the Lambs. And what was that famous line Darth Vader said? Was it, "Luke, I am your father"? The evil queen in the Snow White movie never said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." And do you remember the Monopoly board game? Well, the mascot actually does not wear a monocle. And Curious George doesn't have a tail. How many of these did you catch? Well, actually, all of these are false. And if you're scratching your head or doubting me, you're not alone. These facts have been disputed for years, and they all contribute to an eerie idea called the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect was named after Nelson Mandela, a civil rights leader and the former president of South Africa. He actually passed away recently, but there are thousands of people who falsely remember his death in the 80s or 90s. And this memory is as vivid as your memory of Hannibal Lecter's "Hello, Clarice," or an incorrect image of the Monopoly Man. Many people believe that the Mandela effect explains the possibility of alternate universes, and others push the Mandela effect in the category of conspiracy theories. But given what we already know about memory, and our unconscious ability to alter and acquire memories that aren't always true, it makes sense that everyone collectively has come to believe the real line from Star Wars is, "Luke, I am your father." So as you have now seen with the misinformation effect and the Mandela effect, you should know that memory is not really that reliable, and our brains are actually really bad at remembering details. The next topic I want to talk about is something called the 7 Sins of Memory. They're from a book called The 7 Sins of Memory, How the Mind Forgets and Remembers. And in the book, Harvard professor and psychologist David Shader dives into each concept and how it creates memory errors. In the rest of this video, I'll just go over the brief definition of each sin. Most of us do not commit these sins with ill intentions. They're often just honest mistakes that we can't control. They might even be frustrating. The first 3 sins of memory are sins of omission. Sure, the memory might be there, but it's unavailable whenever you need to recall it. Now, the 3 sins of omission in false memory are absent-mindedness, transience, and blocking. So first off, we have absent-mindedness. Have you ever went into a room only to forget why you walked in there the first place? This is simply a case of absent-mindedness, and it seems to be caused by 3 main things: not paying attention to a task at hand like what you're doing, or paying too much attention to something else, or getting distracted by other thoughts or events happening around you. Secondly, we have something called blocking. Have you ever had a word or a phrase on the tip of your tongue? Your memories are blocking your ability to recall information. Blocking can be extremely frustrating, but usually it's only temporary. Like you'll be in the shower tomorrow and remember that word that you were looking for. And third, we have transience. So what did you eat for lunch yesterday? What did you eat for lunch a week ago? A month ago? What about last year? Do you remember what you ate? It's no secret that memories fade over time. Even though some memories persist due to their traumatic nature or significance, Other memories just don't stick. Transience simply explains the concept that memories are less accessible as time goes on. While this seems like just a fact of life, it can make a difference in eyewitness credibility. So the next 4 sins are sins of commission. They involve a memory that does exist, but may be false, skewed, or contain inaccurate details. The 4 sins of commission are misattribution, suggestibility, bias, and persistence. So misattribution, also known as source misattribution, occurs when you cannot remember the source of a memory. Say you saw a study or a fact quoted in the New York Times. In reality, you heard it quoted on a TV show. It may have been a joke or a fake fact on the show that they were poking fun at, but you think that the credibility is that worthy of a reputable newspaper. And this is an honest mistake, but an example of misattribution nonetheless. When telling stories to people in my life, I fall prey to this sin oftentimes because I have read so many books but fail to remember which book the story was in. It helps a lot when I make book summaries over them though. Next, we have suggestibility. Memory errors can also be created by suggesting something about the person's memory. Just like I mentioned earlier with the Loftus and Palmer study, suggestibility and leading questions can make a big impact on an eyewitness's testimony in court. But suggestibility may pop up even without ill intentions. One example of suggestibility involves the presuppositions to suggest facts. For example, you could ask someone who is rather suggestible, "What time in the afternoon did you see the man walking down the street?" Now this question itself is very highly suggestive. First of all, it suggests that the person did see a man walking down the street. Secondly, it does suggest that the person saw a man. And thirdly, it also suggests that the time in which they saw the man was in the afternoon, as opposed to in the morning or the evening. And if none of these facts were established earlier, that simple question could be a case of leading a witness. Now the second to last memory sin is called bias. Humans are meaning-making creatures. When we observe things around us, we really try hard to make meaning of them based on our prior knowledge. Unfortunately, that prior knowledge may be skewed by bias. And when we go back to recall our observations, that bias may taint what we remember about an incident. So let's go back to that man walking down the street. Based on the area that you were in at the time, the clothes the man was wearing, or even just the color of his skin, your memory of that man might be biased. You might remember him to look suspicious, even if he was just walking down the street. Now this is called bias, and all humans are susceptible to it, even if they try not to be. And in some cases, it can lead to devastating consequences. Lastly, we have something called persistence. There may be some memories that we would rather forget, and I'm not just talking about, embarrassing moments that we all have. Anyone who has experienced trauma understands that the memories of that event, no matter how horrifying they are, might just never go away. Well, the opposite can also happen. The memories may flood back on a moment's notice without warning. It could be triggered by a sensory input, or just come out of the blue. This is called persistence. Memories continue to come back, even when people try to make an effort to get rid of them. Traumatic memories can cause psychological damage, and when they persist, a person may display symptoms of PTSD or depression. So, as a summary of this video, the Loftus and Palmer study changed words in a sentence to see how suggestible students were. They were very suggestible. The Mandela effect is when we misremember something in our past, and usually large groups of people misremember the same thing. And there are 7 sins of memory: transience, absent-mindedness, blocking, misattribution, suggestibility, bias, and persistence. And if you'd like to learn more about cryptomnesia and something called the skeleton theory of memories, you may want to check out the full article in the description below. Otherwise, if you want to test your memory, you can do that too. I want to let you know that I just finished developing a memory quiz that tests your long-term, your short-term, and your working memory in less than 5 minutes. And if you'd like to participate and see how you compare to other people, there's a link in the description below so you can take that quiz absolutely free. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you in the next video.
At Easy Financial, we're here to help you every step of the way.
Okay, so this once again gives us lots of information about memory. Again, talks a little bit about that idea of amnesia and adds a few more details about issues around memory. So recognize that the reconstructive nature of memory means that we are making up a lot of our memories. And there are some clinical implications that are dealt with in your book about this. And there's also some ethical considerations about this. So he talked about, 2 of these videos now talked about Elizabeth Loftus and her research on memory suggestibility. And in the second video, they actually went through this experiment that she did, looking at suggestibility. So the question is, what happens with the leading question when you're adding information in to the question to get the person to agree with you more or disagree with you more, right? And then, the book and the videos both talked more about this idea of false memories and how durable they might be. So we've talked about amnesia here. Recognize that your book also talks about this idea of source amnesia, and recognize that it would be a really terrible life if we remembered everything. It would be an awful life, right? We wouldn't want that. Also, in terms of dealing with deja vu, when we've heard things before, it seems familiar. That's another form of memory storage. Now, sometimes it's difficult to actually differentiate what is real and what is not real when we're recreating our memories. And there's very likely going to be some false recollections when we're trying to recall anything. And we just saw a video that talked about some of the insights into this idea of false memories. So recognize that with children and their eyewitness statements that they can be very unreliable. There's a lot of error in children's memory recall. And so there's certain interviewing techniques that should be used to prevent this idea of children having false memory recall. Also, repeated suggestive questioning can lead to vivid false memories, right? So let's have a look at that a little bit more closely. Of the Loftus's experiment. So we've talked about children's memory. I think we're on to the next slide. I somehow went back here. Let's go back. Not sure why this is doing this. So here we go. So, psychologists really struggle to distinguish between what are really true and what are invented memories. And as you saw here, leading questions can lead to very inaccurate recall, but neutral and non-leading questions can lead to more accurate recall. Whoops. And so this is a problem for jurors, right? When they have child testimony on abuse as the sole evidence, it's not, it can be very inaccurate. And the memory research highlights the complexity of determining the accuracy of recollections, especially from child witnesses. And so we have to have careful consideration of the interviewing process for child witnesses. So if you want to enhance your academic performance through memory research, you can use the SQ3R study method. So let's see what that is.
Mistakes I see people make is they pseudo-study. So pseudo-studying is when you are studying but you're not really studying. So you might be reading a textbook but you're kind of reading it lazily. You're not really processing the information, so you're just wasting your time. It's the complete opposite of studying smart. Instead, you should be aiming to study actively. So ask yourself questions, summarize your notes, things like that. And studying actively is maybe the single most important thing when it comes to studying smarter. So how exactly do you do that? How do you make your studying more efficient so you're not wasting so much time? And before I answer that, real quick before we start, I've recently added 2.5 hours of extra lessons to the Transform Your Grades in 30 Days course, and I'm going to keep improving it and adding to it. My aim is to really make it this one-stop shop where if you're seriously looking to improve your grades, then the Transform Your Grades course has everything you need in a neat little package, from more than 5 hours of lessons, one-on-one support from me, quizzes, a workbook, a productivity planner, a private community, and various other bonuses too. So hit the link in the description. There's currently a 50% promotional offer happening right now. But back to studying smart, I want to introduce you to the SQ3R method of studying and go through how I use it to study smarter and more efficiently. And SQ3R is a reading comprehension method named for its 5 steps: survey, question, read, recite, and review. It's a method used to help with learning and processing information, because I'm sure you've been in a position where you've read an entire page of a textbook, but after you finish reading it, you forgot everything you just read. And the SQ3R method is designed to prevent exactly that from happening. It's a 5-step system, so I'll go through each step. Survey. So before you even read anything, whether it's a chapter of a book, your lecture notes, or even your own notes, you should spend a few minutes skimming through the text to gather the important information. So things like reading the title, skimming through the introductions and conclusions to orient yourself to the most important points of each chapter. And you take notes of all bold headings and subheadings, and notice any charts, maps, or other diagrams. And the reason why this step is so important is twofold. So firstly, your brain can process information a lot faster if it has a rough idea of what to expect. So if you already know what each paragraph is kind of about, then when you go to read it properly, you'll be able to process and retain that information a lot more efficiently. And secondly, you're not just reading the text once, but you're reading the main points twice. We really want to move away from just reading passively, where you read a block of text, but then you forget what it says. And this survey step is the first step in doing that. Question. The question stage is, in my opinion, the most important step in this whole process. So during the initial survey of the material, you're encouraged to create questions about the text. These questions that you write out will not only give you kind of these study questions for later on, but they will also help you consider what you already know and how that fits in with what you are about to learn. So the better the questions are, the better your comprehension is likely to be, because the questions give you purpose. You need a purpose when you're reading, so you need to have a goal in mind, because when your mind is actively searching for answers to questions, it becomes engaged learning, because you can literally spend 8 hours learning passively, but you might not be studying at all. It's important that you turn your passive learning into engaged learning so that you actually remember what you read. And I made an entire video on this topic, Study Smart, Not Hard, Passive versus Active Studying. You can click on the pop-up banner above to watch it, because by increasing your active studying, you can literally cut your studying time in half and still process the same amount of information. Read. Now that you've skimmed the text and created your questions, it's finally time to read. So at this point, you've already created an organized plan for what you're about to learn, but now you're plugging in the rest of the information. You should now be reading with a purpose in mind, and that purpose is to answer the questions that you wrote down earlier. And those questions encourage you to be actively thinking about what you're reading, so you're not just reading the text passively. You can also write down new questions too that you can answer later on. Recite. The recite stage is what really sets SQ3R apart from just rereading or taking notes. After each paragraph, stop and recall your questions and see if you can actually answer them from memory. So this involves setting aside the text and saying out loud everything you have learned. And this is taking advantage of active recall. And if you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you'll know how highly I regard the active recall method. It really is an incredibly effective strategy that I use still to this day. So you look back at your questions and you see if you can answer them from memory. But if you can't, then you look back at the text again, and after a few minutes, close close the book and try answering the questions again. And you keep doing this until you can answer all the questions, but don't move to the next section until you can recite the answers from the previous section. And this step, the recite step of the SQ3R method, is crucial because you're stimulating your brain to recall the information and move it from your short-term memory over to your long-term memory, so you'll be able to remember it for longer. And there have been countless studies that show the process of testing actually helps you recall information better than if you are not quizzed at all. It's exactly why I added so many quizzes in the Transform Your Grades course. I think we've added about 38 separate quizzes in there, one after each lecture, because it's this active recall and answering questions about what you just learned that really helps the information stick. Review. After reciting everything you can remember, it's time to review the text for anything that you skipped or anything that you didn't quite understand or couldn't recall. So once you've finished the entire chapter using the steps I mentioned, go back over the questions you created for every heading and see if you can still answer them. If not, look back and refresh your memory and then continue. And this review stage gives you instant feedback about how well you processed and retained the information. The SQ3R method is how I study at university, but after a while, you'll realize that you'll just end up doing it naturally. So for example, when you start reading a chapter in a textbook, you won't actually be thinking, oh, let's use the SQ3R method, right? But you'll just kind of do it automatically. Like you'll just start writing out questions naturally, and that's really where you want to be, where you're using these kinds of advanced study methods without even having to think much about it. And if you want to learn about more study methods just like SQ3R, I made a video on the study methods that I personally recommend and the methods that I think that you should avoid. You can click on the card on the screen. And I also made a video on how I'm able to study for 14 hours a day. Again, you can click on the card on the screen, and if you do need a bit of extra support with your studying, like I mentioned earlier, you can check out the Transform Your Grades course where there's currently a 50% sale, link in the description below.
Here's one thing you need to do before buying anything on
Just realized my microphone was off, but I'm just going to keep going. And we can also select study strategies that best suit our learning styles. So let's have a look at a video finally that talks about how to improve our memories.
As a student, you have a lot of information to understand and memorize for your tests. If you have powerful photographic memory, your job is much easier. But if you're one of us mere mortals, then you face two issues. First, you don't remember everything you should, and second, it takes too much time to memorize. What if I told you you could have your cake and eat it too? Here's how you can boost your memory, memorize more facts, and spend less time doing it. Dr. Jabal, medschoolinsiders.com. For more lessons, insights, and tips, follow me on Instagram at medschoolinsiders. Now there are different types of memory, such as procedural memory, which is like knowing how to swing a golf club, and declarative memory, like being able to recite and draw the cervical plexus for your anatomy exam. We care about semantic memory, which is a type of declarative memory, and that is the type that's going to help you get an A on your chemistry final and a 525 on the MCAT. From examining neural networks in sea snails to caring for amnesic patients with localized lesions, neuroscientists have learned a great deal as to how human memory works and how to squeeze the most utility out of our hippocampi. The hippocampi are the centers in our brain that store long-term memory. Looking back over a century ago, we can thank the psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus for studying his own memory and generating what is now known as the forgetting curve. In its simplest terms, the forgetting curve demonstrates that after forming a memory, we gradually forget more and more of it as time elapses. Retrieving memories is a separate process from storing them, and this too is imperfect. That's why eyewitness reports are notoriously unreliable. We know from neuroscience fundamentals that repetition potentiates neural connections and allows us to remember information more effectively. The problem is that we have far too much information to learn. We can't repeat every fact we need to know on a daily basis. Enter the spacing effect. By repeated exposures to a piece of information at increasing intervals between each repetition, we can optimize memorization and retain the most information in the least amount of time. The key here is that you must recall the information and not simply recognize it. Recall refers to being given a cue and retrieving the relevant information on your own. Recognition refers to seeing a piece of information and finding it familiar, thinking, oh yeah, I know that. For memory purposes, recall is far superior to recognition. This is correlate to the testing effect, whereby being tested and having to recall a piece of information strengthens the memory encoding process. The spacing effect is most powerful when the timing is just right. If too little time elapses between repetitions, the information is not reinforced as strongly. If too much time passes, you forget and are unable to recall the desired information. Medical students are tasked with learning insane amounts of information in a very short time frame. Through necessity, many have turned to less common study tools to aid them in overcoming this seemingly insurmountable feat of knowledge. Enter spaced repetition software, the king of which is Anki. Anki and other spaced repetition software automate the process of scheduling facts that you need to learn in the form of flashcards. While far from perfect, Anki is the best option we have right now. I have no affiliation with Anki, but I use it heavily as a medical student and ascribe much of my own success to using it properly. It's cross-platform and syncs across all your devices, which is important for reasons I will get to shortly. Inevitably, many students ask me, therefore you will learn the information on those flashcards faster and more effectively. Second, if you create the cards, they are in your own words and you'll have no difficulty understanding them. Lastly, you can practice good flashcard principles and best practices, which most students do not follow in creating their flashcards. Creating these ineffective and bad flashcards is the most common mistake and main reason that students end up dropping Anki altogether. The main benefit to using a pre-made deck is that you will save time on the card creation process. However, if you are following the principles from this channel, you should be efficient enough to create your own cards and reap those additional benefits. As a medical student, I always created my own flashcards. That being said, if you find a high-quality deck with high-quality cards, one could justify taking the hit in active learning for the benefits in time savings. When learning memorization-heavy information, like studying for the MCAT or USMLE Step 1, using Anki will not only help you learn the information faster, but also retain it for longer periods of time. By using Anki in your biology or psych classes as a freshman, you'll remember more information 2 years later when you're studying for the MCAT. But not all information is created equal, and for some classes I would recommend Anki, but for others you may not need it, or you may find yourself making only a few cards. For information-heavy but conceptually light courses like biology, sociology, or psych, your Anki reliance should be higher. Other courses like physics and organic chemistry are much more conceptual heavy. There is still use for flashcards in these subjects, but I would make fewer cards here and prioritize doing more practice problems instead. Some people suggest creating multiple choice practice problem cards, but I advise against this as you may find yourself simply memorizing the answer to the question rather than reinforcing the information and concepts you need to learn. More on card creation best practices in the Part 2 video. If you're a medical student, know that most of your subjects will be quite conducive to flashcards. I have an entire playlist on how to use Anki most effectively. If you aren't already familiar with the program, these short videos will get you up to speed in no time.
In next week's part 2 video, we'll cover specific best practices on how to create good flashcards. Remember, the benefits of Anki are only as good as the flashcards you create. Now, while creating good flashcards is key, the proper daily use of Anki is equally important. Here's how to realistically achieve a daily practice. First, review strategically. As a medical student, I was reviewing between 50 and 300 cards daily for months at a time. As someone who matched into an ultra-competitive surgical specialty, there were many early mornings and late nights, limiting the amount of time I had to review my Anki deck. So to reasonably get through all of my cards and make this habit sustainable, I learned to use any downtime I had to review flashcards. Unlike studying an entire lecture, Anki cards are self-contained, meaning reviewing even 5 cards in the course of 1 or 2 minutes is a good use of your time. That meant cranking through 10 or 20 cards while waiting in line for breakfast, while waiting for the elevator, or even while walking between buildings. These few cards here and there added up quickly, allowing me to complete most of my reviews before I got home for the day. It's not glamorous, and it's not easy, but practicing cards in such a manner was one of the key factors allowing me to crush my boards and impress attending surgeons on my audition rotations. I personally am not a fan of doing Anki for more than 30 or 60 minutes straight. Therefore, if it was a weekend and I was spending most of the day studying, I would set a single 25-minute Pomodoro of Anki to break up the monotony from other studying. This is a great trick to enhance your mental endurance over the course of a day. It's ultimately much easier to do 4 chunks of 75 cards than a single session of 300 cards. Number 2, practice every single day. Anki runs on an algorithm which optimizes for learning information, but it is not easy to schedule days off. It does not care if you are sick, if you want to relax, or if you're on vacation. It is therefore critical you do your flashcards every single day. This is challenging in the first few weeks as you are building the habit. And during this time, your review burden builds, meaning the number of cards you are assigned to review each day. Number 3, avoid getting behind on cards. Inevitably, you will fall behind. You will skip a day here or there. But understand that this should be an exception, not the rule. The more often you skip days, the harder it is to keep up, and the less utility you will get from Anki. When you do fall behind, your best bet is to take a couple days playing catch-up and power through your overdue cards. Avoid skipping days and avoid resetting the cards, as you are losing valuable interval information that ultimately helps to consolidate your semantic memory. Number 4, don't make too many cards. The 2 biggest reasons students fail to stick with Anki is creating poor flashcards, which we'll talk about in part 2, and creating too many flashcards, resulting in an unrealistic daily review burden. Students often get carried away when first using Anki, sometimes creating over 100 cards.
Okay, if you want to know more about Anki, I'll let you look that up. It's just one thing I thought you might be interested in if you really want to study this. You don't have to use Anki, you can just use the cards, but it gives you an option. And that's all I have for this part on memory. Okay, so we're going to move on to stress in the next lecture. Bye for now.